Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you tuning in. And in this video, we're going to be looking at shooting with your GoPro in and on your car. The reason I'm doing this is because we've just come into the summer weather here in the Pacific Northwest. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be shooting with their cameras on their vehicles, and I'm going to show you the proper way to set up your cameras to avoid the whole overheating issue, and more importantly, to make sure your camera doesn't fall off your car and get broken. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is DemonView. So, welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you tuning in and appreciate the fact that I actually shaved my head off because it's actually so warm here in the Pacific Northwest. So, some of the things we're going to be looking at in this video are securing cameras to the outside of your car so nothing falls off as you're using it, and then we'll be looking at shooting from inside your car and preventing overheating just using a few simple steps. So hopefully you find this video useful and you learn a few things, and if you do, make sure you click those like and subscribe buttons, as it really does help with the channel and it doesn't cost you a thing to do so. So let's get on with the video. A couple of things. Number one, there's some chipmunks and squirrels looking at me very angrily because I didn't bring any peanuts with me to throw them while I'm feeding this. The other thing we're going to look at right now is securing a GoPro to your car. Now, there's only one mount I recommend for the outside of your car, and that's one of these. It's a magnetic mount. Now, this is very important compared to something like a suction mount. And don't get me wrong, this is the GoPro suction mount. It's an excellent suction mount. In fact, one of the best ones I've ever used, just because that rubber there is so fantastic. However, if you attach a suction mount to your car, if there's any dirt or any dents on your paintwork or even your glass, this suction can be broken on that suction cup, and your suction cup can actually end up falling right off your vehicle. Now, when you've got a $300 or $400 camera attached to that, that is not a good thing at all whatsoever. And that's why I only recommend using a magnetic mount. Now, I've recommended these mounts before. I'll leave the link up for you to look at, but this has a little extra bit in it that I actually got that allows me to swivel the camera around and adjust the angle so I can actually shoot at a right angle like this. Now, that's important because you don't want to be using the same old camera angles that everybody else does. A lot of people, when they're actually shooting these videos, they tend to get their camera, stick it on the top of the car like so, and that's it. They just have the camera pointed straight forward. That's really not very exciting, is it? So that's why I actually use this type of swivel mount. So if I actually get the camera, I can turn it around. I can actually mount it down here on the doorway, if you can see that. And as you can see, I get a nice low down shot. I can even swivel it out a bit and have it looking a bit that way, which means half my image is not being taken up. I only kind of have, you know, about a quarter of the car in frame, and everything else is open road. Now, there's all sorts of places you can put this. Obviously, it's not going to work on glass, so you really want to stick it to the metal because it's magnetic. But here's the interesting thing. This isn't one of those magnetic mounts that people say, hey, you can wear on your clothing, you know, because it's a weak magnet, it won't stretch or anything. This is a 40-pound pull magnet. So if I go to remove that, I really have to try and remove that with a lot of force. Once you stick this on your car, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, in the case of suction cup, like I said, any dirt or anything like that under the suction cup can actually cause a loss of vacuum. Also, temperature changes. If you put one of these low down on the outside of your vehicle and you start going through like streams or rivers, if you're doing a bit of off-roading, the temperatures there can actually be 20 or 30 degrees colder than surrounding air. And when that happens, you get contraction happening on your rubber, you lose the vacuum, your camera falls off, and there's been lots of cases of that happening. I've even seen a few old videos where people use suction cups on their airplane. Never, ever use a suction cup on the outside of your vehicle. Use a rare earth magnetic mount. This one even has a rubber base on it to stop you from damaging your paint or scratching it or anything like that. Like I said, you put that on and it ain't going anywhere. I mean, I've driven with these for God knows how many years in all types of weather. Some of the footage hasn't been usable because it's been pouring rain and windy to the extreme. These mounts do not go anywhere, so I recommend on the outside of your vehicle, use one of these magnetic mounts. Now, the other type of mount you can use is you can use something like a Jaws mount with the gooseneck on it. Now, having the gooseneck is really handy. In fact, this camera is mounted to a long gooseneck which is attached to the car. But this is handy because you can actually revolve around the top here to change all the angles you want. And, you know, you can actually use this on non-magnetic surfaces like the roof rack rails here, get a good clamp on it. But as you can see, this particular roof rack rail has got that kind of slanted outside on it, so you want to make sure you're not putting your Jaws mount on it this way, because if it slips at all, that can actually fire it off. What we want to do is actually put it on the other side, and now you can see that's actually closed around the roof rail, and that's not going to actually go anywhere at all whatsoever. And these can be quite handy and quite good. I do recommend them, but they do have their drawbacks. Number one, if you don't have a really tight clamp here, or if the roof rack bar is actually too big, then yeah, you can actually have it slip off, and I say actually way too much. The other thing that can happen is that these gooseneck bits, they can become cracked over time or slip off, and that's not a good thing because your GoPro could technically fall off on these. That's why I wouldn't use one of these on the outside of an aircraft either when I'm flying, because they can pop apart, and that's not a very good thing. So again, magnetic mount if you can. And then you have the front of the car. Now the front of the car, you do have a nice metallic hood here, but what if you want a low down shot? Usually the front grille and your front bumper are made out of plastic. Well, again, you could actually use the clamp here on this, but then again, because it's actually so wide and it slants out, that might not be the greatest idea. But GoPro do sell this mount called the GoPro Gumby, one of the worst sounding product names ever, but I assure you, it's actually a very good mount. With this grill, I can actually put this in behind here, twist it around, and with just a few moments, it's gone all the way through. I can just put that through like that, secure it, and now I have a GoPro mount looking forward on this grill. And if I tighten this up, it's going to be pretty secure, pretty solid, in which case it's going to go nowhere. The only problem is that having a camera on the front of your car does subject it to stuff like stones and gravel, which can fly up off the road. So what you probably want to do is make sure you put your camera in a protective case if you're going to shoot with your camera mounted this low. So next up we have shooting from inside your vehicle, and there's a couple of things you're really going to want to pay attention to here, because number one, obviously a magnetic mount is not going to work on your window shield. And a lot of people are going to want to be shooting from the window shield, you know, and don't put something loose on your dashboard, and do not use a suction clamp on your dashboard. These dashboards, which are plastic, are usually textured with small, fine little cracks and ridges running through them. Your suction cup might stick there for a few minutes, but it will become loose and go flying about if you take a corner, that type of thing, and you don't want anything jamming under your pedals while you're driving. That would just be dangerous. So make sure you don't use a suction cup on your dashboard. So we'll look at one of the basic ways that people use their GoPro, and that is simply to use a suction cup, mount it in their car window, like so. And there we go, that's fine. But if you stick it too far to the top or too far to the edge, you do sometimes have these rubber strips that run around the outside, or in this case, like a piece of texture here, and that will actually help break suction too. You don't want to do that, so you want to make sure that the glass is free of any obstructions, and if you can, wipe down the glass first, make sure it's free of any grease or anything like that. Also, don't mount your GoPro where it's going to cause obstruction of your vision. If there's a crash or any type of accident and that thing is stuck in your window, you could be found at fault because you couldn't see where you were driving, so keep that in mind. Now, one of the problems you're going to have while driving in these summer months is that with your GoPro mounted in a window, it's very likely it is going to overheat. Now, this is something that just happens with GoPros, and especially if you have them mounted in a window. You can think, well, the car is nice and cool, I have the AC on. That's the ambient temperature of the air. That means nothing to your camera whatsoever. You're going to have direct sunlight hitting that thing, and that can actually result in 20 to 30 degrees hotter temperatures on the surface of that camera. And considering how hard that camera is working, don't be surprised if it overheats. So there's a couple of things you can do, however, to prevent overheating, and here's what you're going to need. You're going to need a power supply like this that plugs into your 12 volt or your cigarette lighter. Use the GoPro cable that came with your camera, or purchase the GoPro USB-C pass-through door. This is one of GoPro's best inventions and is one of the key steps in preventing your camera from overheating. The nice thing is that it's about $2 or $3 more than other replacement doors that you see, but it comes with a 4.5 meter long original GoPro cable, and unlike the other doors that you see for sale, it's got this cable holder built into the side of it and a rubber gasket on the inside of it, which means if you're using this with the cable, guess what? This is now weatherproof because there's no way moisture can get in here. Now, it's not waterproof. Do not bring this into the friggin' ocean or your swimming pool. It is weatherproof. This is meant to say that against raindrops, snow, some dust, dirt, that type of thing, you're absolutely fine. Do not bring it into water. So here's the steps you're going to want to do. You're going to want to remove the side door from your camera like so, and remove the battery. Even if you're using an Enduro battery, take the battery out altogether, because this is going to help prevent overheating completely. One of the reasons your camera overheats when you leave the battery in it is it's trying to charge the battery, which produces heat. It's trying to discharge the battery because the camera's in use, which produces heat. And then your camera itself doing all the processing is going to generate more heat. Take that battery out and put on the GoPro USB-C pass-through door. Now, the main reason I recommend doing this is because if you don't use one of these doors and you just have a cable plugged right into the side of your camera, the weight of this cable, and every time you go over a bump or a bounce, is going to be pulling on the USB port, and that will eventually break your port. However, if you use the USB-C GoPro pass-through door, it has this nifty little cable holder that holds the cable in place, and even upside down, that takes the weight of the cable, not the USB-C port. And then you're just going to mount it in your car window, like so, and plug the other end into your power supply. There you go. That's it. That's how simple it is to actually power your camera externally and prevent overheating. But there are a couple of other steps you can do. So one of the things I do, and believe it or not, this is something that generates a lot of heat in your GoPro, it's actually this rear screen. When you have that set to never turn off and to 100% brightness, that actually generates a lot of heat. And because you're driving, you shouldn't be looking at a little screen anyway. So what you want to do is actually have this set to 10% brightness, that is plenty bright, and to power off after 1 minute. And that way you'll have a blank screen here, your camera will be recording, but you won't be generating a lot of heat because that screen will now be deactivated, and that's really a key component when you're powering your camera externally. The other thing I like to do is hyper smooth. I turn it off completely. And you may be thinking, oh, well, now your camera footage is going to be shaky. It's a car. It's got suspension, it's got shock absorbers, and it's going to be mounted rigidly to your front window by the suction cup, which means as your car moves, this camera is going to move. And that's not going to translate into a lot of bumpy kind of vibration unless you're doing extreme off-road stuff. If you're just driving about, you can afford to turn hyper smooth off. And you can steady your footage in post using Real Steady or Gyroflow if you want to do it for free. And not only is that really going to cut down on overheating, if you're not powering your camera externally, if you're just using the internal battery, that's going to be a heck of a lot of energy savings, as now your camera is not trying to stabilize all that high quality footage. So yeah, that's actually a really fantastic little tip there. And if you follow those like simple tips, that's it. You're going to be able to drive and really reduce the chances of your camera overheating. The only other thing then that contributes to overheating is stuff like frame rate and resolution. I tend not to film all my drives in 240 frames per second 2.7K or 120 frames per second 4K. Just ridiculous. It's overkill. You know, if you want slow motion, film at least maybe 60 frames per second, but otherwise filming like, 30 frames per second, you're still going to get high quality looking footage, and it's going to look fantastic. It's certainly far better than you're going to get with a dash camera. And those are the simple tips for mounting your camera outside your car and shooting, and mounting your camera inside your car and shooting. But there is one more tip I'll give you. Well, actually, I lied. There's two more tips I'm going to give you. Number one is that, yeah, voice control is a great thing, but if you have the radio playing or you have passengers in your car and you're talking, the GoPro microphones can easily pick up a command and tell your camera to do things you don't want it to do. I'm trying to avoid using those words in case the camera does exactly that right now. So what I sometimes tend to do is put the smart remote wrapped around the steering wheel where I can reach it to start and stop recordings that way. And that is a very handy thing to do. Or you can just, since it's mounted in your window, just use the buttons. I tend to leave voice control turned off, so that's a good tip for number one. Number two is, if you're going to use a suction cup, don't get stuck into using that same old boring angle of having it just pointed straight out the window. I tend to combine my suction cup with another gooseneck, and sometimes I'll actually mount it in the side window and have it pointing in the side out this way, and it really does give you some good and interesting camera angles. So don't forget to experiment a little bit. Even put a tripod in the back, kind of weigh it down, have it shooting out from between the seats, that type of thing. And these are all little things that you can do to kind of make your footage just that little bit more impressive when you're shooting from inside your car. And finally, it doesn't matter if your camera's mounted inside your car or outside your car, be careful when you shoot. Don't get distracted. watch the road, pay attention to things, and be careful. Remember, this camera is actually a double-edged sword. It can work against you if you're driving dangerously, if you're driving like an idiot and you're involved in a crash and this gets used as evidence. This evidence can be used against you because it will prove how you were driving, and it's got GPS built in. It's going to show how fast you were going and what your road position was. So for the love of God, if you're shooting in your car, be careful, don't get distracted, and stay safe. And that's it. That's my simple tips for shooting inside and outside your car using your GoPro cameras and for doing so safely. So if you liked this video, if you learned stuff you didn't know, please click those like and subscribe buttons. In the meantime, don't forget there's an upcoming giveaway on the channel. As soon as we hit 2K, prizes will be given out. So make sure you pay attention to the community tab to find out more details about that, because this is going to be a good one. In the meantime, like I said, thanks for watching. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I hopefully will see you soon. Cheerio. Yeah, 95 degrees heat. I'm pretty warm, and I really do feel guilty for not getting some peanuts here, because I've got little animals here looking at me begging for peanuts. So yeah, I'm gonna go inside now, get a cool beer, edit this video, and throw a few peanuts out to people while I'm on the deck editing. Cheerio.